Hello and welcome to the We Needed Roads podcast, so named as pretty much every other Back to the Future reference has already been used as a podcast title. I'm your host Neil Gregory and I'll be joined today by my co-host David Long. Hey David.
Hi Neil. Yeah, we pretty much scraped the bottom of the barrel on the Back to the Future references, but we're here to get into all the TV, film and geekery news.
In our What We've Been Watching section, I'm going to talk about It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia on Netflix, Vikings' 6th and final season on Amazon Prime. What are you going to be talking about, David?
I'm going to be talking about RuPaul's Drag Race, both the US and the UK version, the Pembrokeshire Murders, and Night Stalker, which has been on Netflix.
What to watch?
So first up, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, one of the few sitcoms where all the main characters are absolutely hateful shitheads who are always scheming to betraying each other on a regular basis. It's completely un-PC, and indeed a few questionable episodes have been dropped by Netflix because of use of blackface. Season 14 aired last year, Season 15's in the can coming later this year, and we know the show has been renewed to run at least till Season 18, so at this point they might as well just go for the 20, right?
There's been 20 episodes of that. No, 20 seasons.
20 seasons.
And you want me to watch 20 seasons?
To be fair, there was only 6 episodes in the first season, and then it's generally 10 episodes a season, and they're half an hour, so, put aside a month and you're good, man. You get it done.
It's a commitment, but if you say it's as good as it is, then...
It's not just me saying it's good as it is, it's the longest running sitcom of all time. I mean, clearly people like it if it's still on the air after this time. And I will say, whereas a lot of sitcoms tail off as they get on...
Surely The Simpsons classes as a sitcom?
Yeah, but as I said, lots of sitcoms trail off, and The Simpsons has been dog shit for pretty much most of the time you've been alive. Let's be honest.
Okay, fair enough. We've been watching The Simpsons every night, and we're on to about season 25 at the moment, and at the moment it's like Homer becomes a chef, and yeah, it's pretty pants.
Yeah, I don't miss The Simpsons. I mean, we've bizarrely got to the stage where stuff like Family Guy and South Park are just as old as The Simpsons now. If you want to see a shocking adult animation these days, Rick and Morty probably leads away, and also Big Mouth on Netflix, which again, we'll get into on a later episode.
Big Mouth was there was a line with Big Mouth.
We will save that. So, what else have you been watching then, David?
Well, I've been watching a bit of RuPaul's Drag Race, which, I started watching it because I was made to, and then, you know what, I really like it. It's funny, it's catty, the queens in it are so talented. Like, they have to be comedy queens, they have to be stuff like professional dancers, they have to be singers, they have to be seamstresses, and it is a competition to basically see who wins at the end of it. And it's a good show, Neil. You should watch it, but I know you're not going to.
I mean, I get, right, from your point of view, you're saying, obviously, yeah, the people in it are talented and they've got skills, which is a lot more than other reality shows, so I will give it that off the base. But yeah, I haven't got enough time to watch shows I like and have an interest in. So, try and find stuff that I don't have an interest in.
The queens in it, though, they are so funny.
But you did say you watched the US and the UK version. Now, again, was that by choice?
Well, the UK version's pretty new. Well, we're only on to, season 2 of the UK version, but the US version, I'm pretty sure, is season 13. So it's been going for a while in the US. And
so it's an established franchise.
Yeah, and UK drag fans have been, really wanting it to come over to the UK. And eventually it did last year, and it was a massive hit. So... yeah, it's continuing. I think there's also going to be a drag race in Australia. I think there's also one in Holland. It's pretty well established now.
Next up, I have been watching the 6th and final season of Vikings on Amazon Prime. When Vikings first started many years ago, it was originally thought of as a pretty cheap Game of Thrones ripoff. At the time, Game of Thrones was the biggest show on TV, and everyone wanted that next Game of Thrones.
Yeah, that's why I never watched it. That's why. Well, I did watch it. I watched the first 3 episodes of it. Yeah, Vikings was that itch that I was looking for to fill the Game of Thrones void in between seasons, and it just didn't do it for me.
Yeah, the problem with it is season 1 of Vikings, it was the History Channel. It was made by the History Channel, first of all, and it was their first ever scripted drama. Before that, it was just, all documentaries and reenactment type shows. With Vikings, the whole idea was every channel wanted their own kind of version of it. It was a Irish and Canadian co-production, generally filmed all in Ireland, with a little bit of Iceland here and there. But it actually proved quite a massive hit for the budget of the show. Essentially, the first season tells the story and the rise of the legendary Viking Ragnar Lothbrok, played by Aussie actor Travis Fimmel, and his wife Lagertha, who is like the queen of the Shield Maidens, who's played by a Canadian actress Catherine Winnick. Once it got to season 2 and it had been a success, a lot more money was thrown at it. It wasn't just a small tale sold in the one village. They was raiding off in England, they was off to other parts of Europe, and the budget went way up. I think if you know your history of Vikings, that was a funny thing. I actually watched a show with my old man, and he kept telling me stuff, and I was like, Dad, I know that's history, but that's actually a spoiler for the show if I don't know it. So, yeah, don't tell me how that ends, because you're literally going to tell me how a main character may, die. Having said that, as it is based on history, when we get to the end of Ragnar's story, I thought this would be the end of the show, but because it was doing so well, the show actually continued for another 3 seasons, and it did a time jump. I've lost track throughout the show of how many wives and children Ragnar had, because he was pretty much just ploughing everything in sight as the show went on, as was the Viking way. The show took a really brave leap by suddenly going, right, here's 4 of Ragnar's kids. Oh, by the way, they're adults now, and we're going to follow their stories. And do you know what? Since that point, the show just lost something. Each kind of season, they would lose another major character who would go off to another show and do something bigger.
So what happened? What did it lose? Because, for instance, Game of Thrones, it lost good writers in season 8. What did Vikings lose?
Well, I mean, it didn't lose good writers. It had the same writers on season 8 of Game of Thrones there, so that's something we're definitely going to get into on a later thing. With Vikings, it was actually been written by the same guy who created the show in the first place. He's a former English and history professor, Michael Hurst, and he has written all however many hundreds of hours of Vikings since day one. So you can't blame it on the writing. I just think
consistency throughout then.
I think you spent so many years with the main cast. Also, you know what? I just don't feel like their heart was in it towards the end. When you start losing major characters every episode, I'm about 5 episodes to go on the final season, and I'm like, most of the main characters are gone. I don't really care about these people who are left yet. And, whereas before I would have binged the whole season in a couple of weeks, I'm like, oh yeah, I'll fit a few of them in this week, maybe a few next week. Having said that, when it was at its peak, it was really good. Some of the episodes would definitely be up there with some of Game of Thrones episodes. But when it was bad, it was just turgid. However, you're not going to miss your fix of plundering Vikings, as creator Michael Hurst has signed a new deal with Netflix to produce a spin-off show called Vikings Valhalla. This is going to take place a century after the events of the original Viking show and will lead up to the days of William the Conqueror. David, are you more excited for Vikings Valhalla?
I'm not going to lie to you, Neil, I'm not. But it is nice to know that those Viking fans out there are going to have something to look forward to.
David, what else have you been watching then?
I've been watching The Pembrokeshire Murders, which is a 3-part ITV drama based on the Coastal Path murders that happened in Pembrokeshire, Wales. It starred Luke Evans, who's always been my sneak tip for the next James Bond. I feel like he's got the look, he's got the charm, he's got the charisma, but he's 41 now, so he's already on the cusp of being too old. Yeah, he's on the cusp of being too old for the role, but I thought he would have made a good one.
I was going to say, with the Bond films in a minute, with the delays and everything, you essentially need someone who's in their late 20s, because it's going to take a decade of your career. We've had old Bonds now.
They'll be like 35 by the time it comes out. Yeah, I mean, how old's Craig
David?
Yeah, how
Craig
old
Charles.
Not Craig David. Craig Charles.
That's Lister. He's old. He's old
Daniel
enough.
Craig.
From what you've mentioned, it's not a catching the guy. It's we've got the guy. How do we prove that he's guilty? Type of show.
Yeah, exactly. It's finding the evidence. It's gathering up all the information. It's essentially like watching a documentary almost, where you're along for the ride with the detectives as they're telling you the story of how they found this and what date and everything like that. But it's all as a drama-based TV series, and it was quite entertaining. I have to say, I definitely recommend you watching it.
Well, speaking of real-life crime dramas, that will take us nicely to Night Stalker on Netflix. David, tell me about Night Stalker.
I loved Night Stalker. I thought it was such a good documentary. The way it just takes you along the journey from like step one, from talking about the what was the Strangler called?
Hillside Strangler.
Do you remember? Hillside Strangler,
Yep.
yeah. Talking about the Hillside Strangler and the detective on it.
Detective Salerno and Carrillo, yeah.
Okay, well, someone's done their research. You just go really in deep into their story. You feel like you're on the case with them. And I think how it was presented was done so much better than a lot of crime documentaries that I've watched. I mean, because I'm not a massive fan of crime documentaries. My girlfriend loves them, so I have to watch them pretty much every week. But this one in particular, I felt like it really, really got you engaged. It really immersed you in the crime. And because the crimes themselves were horrific, because there wasn't like a pattern. There was no pattern to this serial killer who was committing these acts. it was all just anyone could be a victim. It's almost like you turn up at your house now and you could get killed. It was frightening, and you felt that fear in the documentary. And I felt like that was what made it different to, let's say, the documentary also on Netflix about the Yorkshire Ripper. We started watching that, and it just did not engage me the same way that The Night Stalker did. The Night Stalker really gets you and grips you and doesn't want to let go, and that's why I loved it.
Everything you said, I agree with 100%. You were with the main cops who were doing it. You saw how many years it took them to track the guy and catch him. What I didn't like was it seemed a bit too exploitative at points when it came to the victims. You get shown real crime scene photos. It's fair enough. That's kind of established. But then,
It's historical, yeah.
But what would happen is they would then do a recreation of the crime scene photo with actors at some point. There'd be these little sections that bridge the interviews where they'd be like, look like someone invading a house, and it'd be like a minute. Why are we showing this? The key thing that makes this documentary is the interviews. You don't need to sensationalise it. You don't need to overdo it, because like you said, the crimes were so horrific and it was so random, they couldn't establish a pattern at all. Again, we're not going to get into spoilers for the show. I mean, obviously, you know who the Night Stalker is if you're going to watch the show.
Well, they might not. I mean, I'd known of the serial killer, but I didn't know that.
I knew his name,
him.
but I didn't know his story before I started watching it. Netflix do a brilliant job of their crime documentaries, and you see the money they put behind it when they do their recreations, and they are shot beautifully. They, the editing, the cinematography, everything. It's amazingly done. I just thought, how do you approach the victims and go, oh, by the way, is it okay if we show a photo of one of your murdered relatives? Oh, yeah, we've put a bit of black tape across their face, but then you're still showing someone there in a straight,
100%. I've always wondered how producers even approach questioning the relatives, because essentially they do sort of keep it a mystery as to who the killer is right until the last episode.
Oh, yeah.
But how do you approach questioning the person to say, okay, we want to ask you about how this man brutally murdered your grandmother or your daughter or your mother or whoever, but we don't want you to mention his name because we want to build that suspense throughout. How do you approach that with someone who's a victim of this, a victim's relative, of that brutal crime?
Luckily for them, there were a few surviving victims. Throughout the episodes, I think there was only a couple who actually would talk to camera. When it's real stuff they're showing on screen, I think if they'd done recreations and not shown the real crime scene photos, that would have been okay. That wouldn't have been as disturbing as showing it. But doing both, to me, was overkill. Show the crime, and again, like you say, it's the interviews from the detectives and just the simple descriptions of what the crimes entailed that really make it truly shocking.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, you could totally empathise with what you're saying, but I think people have an innate, strange obsession with serial killers in general and the brutality and details of their crimes. We as human beings find it intriguing to see these images, which is wrong in so many ways, but we do. We want to know how, because essentially serial killers are famous, aren't they? I mean, Neil, name 5 serial killers right now.
You got Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Ed Kemper, the guy from this one, but I won't say his name in case you haven't seen it yet. Harold Shipman.
Try and name 5 victims.
I know exactly the point you're trying to make. Yeah, like you say, the victims are less famous than the
You
killers.
don't know them. You don't know. I couldn't tell you one of Harold Shipman's victims. We build up these serial killers to be famous, which is odd, but that's also sort of intertwined with why we have this obsession with seeing crime photos and knowing the details of their crimes and how they commit them, because they're famous for their crimes and we want to know more information about them, which is wrong in some way, because I feel like we should be really remembering the victims and not the serial killer, because some serial killers are infamous. Everybody's heard of Jack the Ripper. You might not know who he is. Everyone's heard of him.
It's definitely got a point there, but again, it's what gets funded. People want to see that stuff. BBC One's a big new drama at the minute, The Serpent. It's about a serial killer, and like you say, it's just unfortunately, it's one of these genres, and I don't know really what the answer is to that one. And on that, I think we'll leave it for the what we've been watching section this week.
It's always been there though. Throughout history, there's always been that obsession with violence in general. Like ancient Rome, gladiator arenas. Medieval England, people used to go and watch executions for entertainment. And these documentaries are entertainment to inform us on the brutal acts. And the unfortunate fact is it is the serial killer, who you'll remember and not the victim, which is ultimately, I think, the saddest thing.
Right, well, that brings the end to our What We've Been Watching section this week.
Very depressing ending as well.
Please do listen to the rest of the podcast and our next podcast, because we will not go off into a 20-minute diatribe about torture porn and murder. I mean, there's a chance we could, but with that, we're on to the news section.
News.
Now, with the ongoing pandemic and the closure of many cinemas throughout the world, especially in the UK, most studios delayed their blockbusters last year at least once. And now, films that were due out in the start of this year have also now been put back to the end of this year. The latest James Bond film, No Time to Die, has been pushed back to October 8th. The new Ghostbusters film, Afterlife, to November 11th. David, have you seen the new Ghostbusters trailer yet?
I have seen it with the kid from Stranger Things. I forget the actor's name. You know what? It
Finn
looks like
Wolfhard.
an interesting take. Finn Wolfhard, thank you. It looks like an interesting take on Ghostbusters, but I'm actually quite looking forward to it.
Two things I picked from the trailer, obviously, is it's being directed by Jason Reitman, Ivan Reitman's son. For those who don't know, Ivan Reitman was Egon, so Egon's son is directing it. And one little thing is, in the trailer for this film, in the town, you see Shandar Mine Corporation. So I have a feeling there's going to be lots of links back to the original film. I think they're going to completely ignore any continuity with the most recent film.
Well, it wasn't very popular. I mean,
Should we get into it? Okay, let's get into it. Right,
said.
yeah, okay, so...
I haven't actually seen it.
You haven't actually seen it?
I haven't actually seen it. No, I was lying.
That is
I was just going to say...
I didn't hate it. My biggest problem with it was Sony didn't know what the hell they were doing with it. The original trailer for Ghostbusters comes, and it says, 20 years ago, 4 scientists saved New York. Right, well, already they've not done their research, because Winston wasn't a scientist. Winston was just a guy they hired because they needed more help. It's literally how he comes in.
He was essentially the janitor, wasn't he? Or something.
No, he came in because they were just rushed off their feet. They needed more work. They needed more people to work. You're working at Sony. Someone cuts a trailer and they get such a basic fact wrong. It doesn't fill with confidence for how they're going to proceed with the rest of the film. And what was annoying is Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, Kristen Wiig, Leslie Jones are all amazing comedians by themselves. And Paul Feig, who directed it, he's kind of hit and miss. Bridesmaids was brilliant. Spy was brilliant. I couldn't name you many of his other films.
Does Chris Hemsworth come in it at one point?
Hemsworth is in it, and it's just...
Is he the ditzy...
He's the ditzy...
secretary?
Yeah, so they're trying to do the whole gender reversal thing with him being...
You know what? I have seen it.
Oh, so obviously they made that much of an impression on you then?
Yeah, no, yeah. I can't even remember seeing it, but I have seen it.
If they'd let them do their own story and try to not tie it so much to the original films, it would have been a much better film. The director was probably fighting a battle with the studio the whole way going, yeah, but you've got to tie it back to the original in some ways. You've got to tie it back to this. You've got to tie it back to that. This happened in the original. Where's your version of that? Let Paul Feig do what he wants to do. Create your own thing. And then you can... and then if it was and then if it had been successful, they could have
create
tied
your
it
own experience
to
of the
the
film.
new film.
Yeah.
Originally, when this all came out, the idea was to do an all-female Ghostbusters with that team, and then do another all-male version. They was talking about having Channing Tatum and Chris Pratt as two of the newer ones. But I think the single biggest mistake they made with it was having the original cast in it in cameos, but not playing their characters from the original movie. That was so stupid. Bill Murray comes on as a skeptic on TV. Dan Aykroyd gets a line as a cab driver. Sigourney Weaver turns up in the end credits playing Kate McKinnon's mentor. No, she's Dana Barrett. The most egregious one. Winston comes back in it at the end, and he's Leslie Jones' uncle, who loaned her Ecto-1. Why couldn't he have just been Winston? It literally would have made no effect to the film. That's
I see the point you're making.
You've got them back. You've got almost all the cast back, and then you got them playing different characters. It's insane.
Yeah, wasted opportunity, isn't it?
In more news, Edgar Wright's new film, Last Night in Soho, has been put back to October 22nd as well. And I honestly think it's only a matter of time before we hear of delays to Black Widow, Shang-Chi, Top Gun Maverick and Fast 9. They're going to be the big films that draw in £700-800 million box offices. And with cinemas still closed in most of the world, I just don't see that happening in a minute. Warner Brothers have taken a big leap this year by releasing all of their major slate for 2021 in the cinema and also on HBO Max on the same date. Now, of course, HBO Max isn't available in the UK, and we had to wait a month for Wonder Woman 1984, and then had to pay $15.99 for the privilege of sitting through it. In America, a month subscription to HBO Max only costs $14.99. Here, I think we're getting really screwed in that deal. Mainly because Sky Atlantic have a deal with HBO in the UK, so that's what's going to happen. All those films are going to come out here, we're going to get them a month or two later, and then they're going to charge us a separate fee on top of that.
Yeah, it's a massive shame that we don't have HBO Go here. I mean, that'd be definitely a streaming service I'd go for.
So then, my question to you is, David, when do you think cinemas will reopen, and what will happen if some of the bigger chains do go bust?
I don't know when cinema's going to come back, what with everything that's going on in the world at the moment, but I hope it's going to be around April or May at a reduced capacity, obviously. I mean, we're going to be in for a hell of a Christmas, though, with all those blockbusters lined up. That's just going to be delayed, and Christmas is the obvious date for them. Hopefully, I mean, I'm hoping they actually don't all come out at the same time at Christmas. But if that's the case, it's going to be bonkers.
Did you go to the cinema between March and September this year, once it reopened after?
No.
I went to see Tenet, obviously, and sat there confounded and deafened for, like most people, for most of the film. I then went to see The New Mutants, that I couldn't believe was actually in the cinema because it had been on the shelf for about 3 years. In the inter-lockdown period, we actually got a little bit of freedom again. Bill and Ted Face the Music. By no means a great film. It took them years to get it to the screen. It looks pretty cheap. The effects are no way very good at all. But you know what? It was so good. Because it was
entertainment.
It was entertainment.
Just pure entertainment.
And it was uplifting and it was positive. And it was all about music and people coming together to save the world. And after the shit show of the year, it was the film you wanted to see. And I just like the idea that Bill and Ted are now in their 50s and they're struggling suburban dads and they still have not written a song that's supposed to save the universe.
What I was saying to you before we started this podcast, I mentioned to you that I thought this could be potentially the end of cinema chains in general. You know, if HBO are going to be airing a show at the same time they're going to be releasing it in the cinema, why would you want to go to the cinema? Like, I don't want to spend my time in a sitting in a seat with some idiot behind me eating popcorn too loudly, or some kids messing about, shouting loudly, or throwing popcorn and just generally being a nuisance and annoying and making me want to kill them.
I think that's more of what the cinemas you choose to go to and the times you go to see the films.
I mean, maybe that's probably the films. I mean, that's what I get for going to see Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. That's basically every cinema experience. There's only been 2 times where I've ever genuinely enjoyed my time in a cinema, and that was one time when I went to see Star Wars The Last Jedi. Even though I hated the film, the fans there on the midnight screening really made, like, the atmosphere. It was awesome. And the only other time was when I went to see The Artist, and I just went on my own. I was the only person in the entire cinema watching The Artist, and that was a cracking film. And they're the only 2 times. Every other time it's been an annoying child or person or someone chewing or slurping their drink so loudly that you just want to strangle them. And that's not an enjoyable experience. So if I could take a film that's coming out and put it into my home, just watch it on Netflix or watch it on any streaming service, why would I go to the cinema and watch that? So I feel like it could be the end of, like, cinema chains in the next, like, 5 years, 10 years. I think a lot of them are going to go under, which is a real shame, because I mean, I used to. I don't want it to happen. I worked in a cinema. Cineworld Cinemas was my first job as a multifunctional.
And what's your current job as a barely functional?
Well, I have such fantastic memories, like living, like what? Sorry.
So wait, so you had better memories working in the cinema than actually going to see films in the cinema. Do you think because you worked in the cinema and just had to see the shitty behaviour by a lot of people on a regular basis, that kind of put you off going to the cinema? Because why would you want to spend time in a place you worked for so long?
No, definitely not. Definitely not. I mean, working in the cinema definitely made me hate the smell of popcorn. I can't stand the smell of popcorn now. But working there, I mean, it was amazing. We used to have so much fun when it was like 2 o'clock in the morning. We were having popcorn fights whilst we were cleaning up. I mean,
isn't that counterproductive to actually cleaning up? Weren't you literally cleaning up other people's popcorn?
It's okay. Management didn't know at the time. But I mean, that was hilarious, and I still know. I don't know them, but when I go into the cinema and I see people and I recognise people that are still there. Working, and they've maybe had promotions, or maybe they're still working the same role, but regardless, they've been in that job for like 10 years, and I think that it's just such a shame if Cineworld or any other cinema chain went under, because it's just the jobs that have gone for people. David,
there is so much to unpack on what you just said.
So patronising.
Because Cinemas are not dead. They're not even close to dying. A lot of them are in financial trouble because of the pandemic. But once that ends, in the next year and a half or so, first of all, by that point, most of us will have spent the best part of 2 years indoors with no nights out. People will go out for a night out. And going to the cinema, it's not just seeing the film. It's the experience. You go there, you get your drinks, your food, you're watching a trailer. You go with your friends, you go and have a meal sometimes before. You go have a meal afterwards. You talk about the film before, you talk about the film afterwards. It's a night out. It's a communal thing. That whole experience of sitting there with a crowd of people who are enjoying and loving the same movie you are cannot be replicated. And you don't get that. Even if you've got the best, biggest projector in your living room, and you've got 5 of your friends around, which you can't do at the minute due to current guidelines, it will not replicate. I mean, yeah, you said midnight screenings, right? The last bunch of Marvel films, I have been there at the midnight screenings. I saw, and this will be hard to say, all 4 films back to back for a midnight screening of Ragnarok. And when you see a film with fans of it, that's what I love about the midnight screenings. Also, I think a part of your problem is the type of films you go and see, the time of day. Like, I will go and see a film Monday night, Tuesday night, around 9, 10 o'clock. Or you go on in midday. If you want to see the film with no distractions and enjoy it, they're the times you go. If you're going to see Fast and the Furious 9 at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night, yes, it's going to be full of little scrote bastards. That's your fault for going at the wrong time and choosing that film.
But if that's the time that everybody else is going, then that's the experience that.
But it depends on the type. Yeah, but it depends on the type of film, right?
I hope you're right. I hope you're right because I don't want to see him. I don't want to see him go under. Like I said, it's where I've worked. I know.
Do you know what?
I
think worst case scenario, what will happen is, say Cineworld, for example, run out of money and have to close. The infrastructure is there. The buildings are there. The setup's there. You know, they're in all these parks where you've got all the other restaurants and facilities nearby. What will happen is, the second people can go out again, some other company will come along and buy these up and reopen them. So even if it isn't the current companies, and I hope it does stay the current companies for all the people that are employed there now and are, furloughed and waiting to come back to their jobs, but even if that does go by the wayside, other companies will step in. There was an article I read somewhere online last year where one of the suggested ideas was, if these big chains and corporations went under, there was talk that Amazon or Netflix or Disney would buy these cinema chains themselves and use them.
The same thing.
And they would use them as their own things. Netflix want to do this so they make sure they can get their films theatrical runs and make more money. And if they can pick up a cinema chain on the cheap, it's they know it's going to make money again once people can get back out to them.
Yeah, I mean, I hope you're right.
Years ago, when I graduated uni, I went to New York on a holiday, and me and one of my friends, we went to see Freddy vs. Jason on opening night in a main Manhattan cinema. Walking into the screening, it was like Scream 2. Half the people were dressed up as Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees. There was just stuff being flown from the air like you were at a festival, and people were yelling and shouting the whole night. But that was an amazing experience that made a shit film really good at the time. I mean, if you were going to go and watch Parasite and you had that audience, you'd be punching people in the face. It just wouldn't 100%. Work. So, like I say, a big blockbuster film, which is a cheesy action film, you expect that type of audience. You want that kind of audience. A South Korean Oscar drama, not in the English language. I was amazed they had that in my hometown. I went to see it and it was half full. That's not bad going for where I live. I was very surprised by that.
Especially for where you live.
Exactly. Well,
definitely.
I have better experiences where I live in a cinema from you, and we're not far away from each other, mate. So
that's true.
And in our last news story of the week, there are rumours going around that a Harry Potter show is in early stages of development at HBO Max. Now, what do you want to see from a Harry Potter TV series, and do you even want to see a Harry Potter TV series? David?
Not really. I mean, actually, do I want to see one? Honestly, it depends. It depends on what they do. What I want to see is more depth in the world that Rowling created, because I feel like we only really get 3 locations which she's actually written about in this fantasy world, which is Hogwarts, Diagon Alley, and the Ministry of Magic. I mean, I want to know I want to know more about. I want to know what's happening at the other schools, like what's going on at what is it, Drunston or something. I'm gonna piss so many Harry Potter fans off, not knowing the names of these places. But yeah, I want to know what's happening at the other schools. I want to know what's happening with other governments. I want to know the reasons behind why a person is bad. I don't want just Voldemort's bad because he's bad. It doesn't make sense to me. Why is Voldemort bad? What is he trying to achieve? He just wants to be the all-powerful wizard. Why? I don't want that, and I don't want to see. I know, you know what? I don't want a prequel. I want something's going to happen. I want it to be new. I want it to be fresh. I want it to be a new set of characters. Maybe after the world has been saved, what happens then?
Well, I'm probably not as down on the idea. I mean, I wasn't a massive fan of the films. Not to say I didn't like them, but I mean, it was an amazing accomplishment to get the same kids and show them the whole way through from over the course of the 7 films. I think maybe 3 and 4 were the best films. 1 and 2 were perfunctory, and the Deathly Hallows Part 1 was, or Mopey Harry Goes Camping was probably my most hated of all of them.
Mopey Harry Goes Camping.
Do you know what it did? It broke the format of the books and the films, right? Because up till that point, most of them start the same way.
Well, the fact that they split it into 2 films, split it into 2 films to what, milk a cash cow potentially. I mean,
yeah,
they managed to do it, and they managed to do it in a way that was quite they did it well. That book was specifically filled with quite a lot of content. I remember reading that book and being like, "Oh my god, this is amazing! I need to read more." And everything seemed to be happening quite quickly at a pace that was maybe it did warrant 2 films.
I think the best structure for a new show. First of all, I doubt there's going to be much major involvement from J.K. Rowling with her current issues, shall we say. I think that in some ways they're going to try and replicate the plotline of the movies with the new show. All new cast, set it after, like you said, but then have a bunch of new kids come in and follow them throughout their, from their being first years all the way up to graduating. And then you can tie in, as the seasons go on, all these bigger stories behind the scenes.
Another thing that I want to see is I want to see more about Hogwarts itself. I mean, the movies, we don't even get to see what Hufflepuff's common room looks like, or Ravenclaw's common room looks like, and we only see Slytherin's...
That sounds like a crying shame.
But we only see Slytherins in what? Chamber of the Secrets, I think. We don't see it at any other point. And the only way you get to know about these areas is if you have read the books or if you've played Pottermore. Like, I don't want to have to go to a different media to learn about something that I feel like should have already been included in the first place.
Main feature.
So now it's time to go on to our main feature of the podcast. Today we're going to take a short staycation at the Overlook Hotel as we delve deep into Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to getting into it with you. You've got quite an opinion on Dr. Sleep, a rather controversial and big opinion. What is it?
I think it's better than The Shining.
And there's so many ways that you're wrong. Let's start with saying that there's going to be massive spoilers in what we're going to talk about. So if you haven't seen Dr. Sleep, go away, check it out, come back and have a listen to our mindless ramblings and bickering like an old couple, most likely. Neil, go on, start with your first point as to why you think it's a better film.
Right, well, before we get to that, we do need a little bit of background on it. As we all know, well, or perhaps you don't, and you're going to learn that here from us today, which will be great, is that Stephen King hated The Shining movie by Kubrick. Didn't hate his own book, that would be weird.
He didn't hate his own book.
But he wasn't a fan of Stanley Kubrick's adaptation. He basically thought all Shelley Duvall did was scream the whole way through, and all Jack Nicholson did was play the same Psycho role that he'd been regularly playing around the time. King was actually so unhappy with Kubrick's version of the film, he even made his own TV miniseries version from his own screenplay a few years back in the late 90s. It was on Amazon Prime. I started watching it and I turned it off before the end credits because it looked that bad.
Yeah, has anyone seen that version of it?
All I know is it's 6 hours long, and after 60 seconds I'd seen enough.
Isn't that enough to say about King's opinion on...
I think it's more to say about King's adaptations and screenwriting as opposed to his regular book output. One of the stories is that King actually tried to erase Kubrick's ideas from The Shining by penning the sequel, Dr. Sleep, which it basically retcons a lot of plot issues that he had with the Kubrick version. Essentially, that's just that's one of these stories that's out there in the ether. Officially, King wrote Dr. Sleep as a way to deal with his own issues with alcoholism and how he recovered from that. And he wanted to continue the story of an adult Danny Torrance, showing how he dealt with the trauma that he suffered in the original Shining. But I mean, how do you make a sequel to a classic film that the original writer hated so much that he wrote a sequel to fix what he didn't like about it? And how can you make a successful film serving two masters when, despite you not liking the film, it is rightly revered as one of the greatest horror films of all time? I'll tell you what, against all odds, Flanagan delivered with Dr. Sleep. I think, and this is my main point, the main change between the two source novels is where The Shining is about a man's descent into madness in a creepy hotel and how the haunted place, the evil of the hotel, corrupts him. Dr. Sleep expands that mythology, and it's I mean, we see early on the young Danny Torrance, he's still seeing the ghosts from the Overlook Hotel. So already, where the original film was sat in the one location, and it was the place that was inherently evil, and that evil seeped into the characters. Here, it's about the characters. It's about Danny Torrance. And what it does, bar Danny, we didn't really know much more about The Shining in The Shining. It was very abstract. It was just left,
You didn't know. Yeah, no one knew exactly what The Shining was.
This expands that backstory. For me, the best addition in Doctor Sleep is the addition of the Cult of the Knot and Rebecca Ferguson's brilliant Rose the Hat. She leads a band of essentially psychic energy vampires, and they target children who have The Shining. And they travel around in groups like a weird bunch of travelling vampires.
They're essentially gypsies.
They're essentially, like evil, soul-sucking gypsies. But I think what it does well is, like I said, The Shining, one story, one location, ratchets up the tension. Doctor Sleep has about 3 different storylines going on that you know are going to intermesh together. You've got young Danny Torrance shown quickly, then obviously he becomes Ewan McGregor, and we see him still struggling with drugs, still doubling with alcohol, and just trying to get away from everywhere. We also then have the storyline of the Cult of the Knots and how they're trying to track down kids with the shine. And then we also meet the young girl, Abra Stone, who makes a connection later on with Danny Torrance. And you see that these 3 disparate plot lines are all going to line up. Here's a funny thing, right? As I was watching it, I was like, I want to know more about The Shining. I want to know more about the Cult of the Knot. In fact, Danny Torrance was probably the least interesting bit of the plot to me at that point. I wanted to know.
Was, actually, yeah. To be
as great as Ewan McGregor was in it, Rebecca Ferguson stole the scene in every scene she was in that.
I don't wholly disagree with your points, but I mean, I liked Doctor Sleep. It was a good film. Like, if we were going to review Doctor Sleep as just Doctor Sleep, but it's a good film. I definitely think people should watch it. But if you want to start reviewing it in comparison to The Shining, then that's a whole other kettle of fish, and all of a sudden everything I'm going to say is going to be negative in comparison. So
unload. Let's go.
You mentioned they had Mike Flanagan, who, if you don't know, he's also the director of the Haunting series on Netflix. He tried to thread that line between pleasing King and staying also pleasing the Kubrick masterpiece. And I personally think that he doesn't actually achieve either, and that hinders him from really creating something which is in tow a masterpiece as well, like The Shining was. No one's going to watch Doctor Sleep and be, this is a masterpiece. I watched Doctor Sleep, finished it, was like, yeah, it's a good film, went to bed, didn't think anything of it. I watched The Shining when I was about 16 or 14, and I went to bed that night, and I remember this still. I went to bed that night, and it was on my brain for weeks afterwards. I didn't have that with Doctor Sleep. If we weren't going to talk about it in this podcast, I probably wouldn't have thought any more about it at all. I think the fact that Mike Flanagan was trying to thread that line between the 2 factions, he didn't really please anybody. I'm sure at the time when Kubrick's The Shining came out, there were people that hated it because, like King, because it didn't stay true to the book, and there were people that had read the book first were like, oh, this isn't anything to do with The Shining, this happens and this happens.
But I mean, I think that's purely because Kubrick just didn't give a fuck.
Well, if the way he treated his actors is anything to go by, but
yeah, exactly. That comes to my point. Like you look at knowing what you know about the making of The Shining, and you watch it, and you're just like, yeah, this isn't really acting. It's just him making the woman do take after take till she's screaming.
yeah, until she literally can't take anymore.
And then he films it and goes, oh yeah, I'm awesome. Yeah, at the time, that's how you get a great performance. These days, he'd be fired for doing that. So, you can't really compare. I mean, it seems weird to say. I mean, this is my other point, right? The Shining is a really doomy film, right? Like, it starts bad, things get worse, and they get really bad, and they just survive. Doctor Sleep is a more hopeful film. That's what King wanted to do. He wanted to show coming out of the other side of alcoholism. Yeah,
I agree with you. It is a more hopeful film. But that, again, is a negative to me. That's not a positive, because I think that tone of it being hopeful just goes completely against some of the stuff that you see on screen. I mean, you literally see in this film a child being gang murdered by
horrifically.
Horrifically murdered. A child being horrifically murdered. And you also see a woman who's OD'd and neglected her baby to the point where the baby's died, and you see the baby's reanimated corpse in some sort of vision or dream or whatever it was.
Second time Ewan McGregor's had to deal with that, yeah.
you say that, and it's like, oh my god, what is this film? It should be like the darkest thing you've ever seen, but it's not. It's not. It does have this thread of hope and almost light to it. The tone isn't as dark as how I feel like it should have been.
What you say about it not thread, I think it does thread it perfectly because, like you say, it establishes these two new plot lines with the young girl Abra Stone. It expands on her with The Shining. We get more explanation of what The Shine is.
Don't
and we
get me
the cult
wrong.
of the knot.
Yeah, he did a good job. He did a fantastic job of threading the line. But in threading the line, I feel like it's hindered it from becoming an amazing film. It's a good film.
But how could he make the source material better than what he had? That's another thing, right? Doctor Sleep
Kubrick managed it.
No, but Kubrick threw out a bunch of the source material and did what he wanted.
That's what I'm saying. That's exactly what I'm saying.
If you're taking on the directorship of Doctor Sleep, and Flanagan, although as good as he is, he's not nowhere near the level Kubrick was at the time. He's an amazing director, but he didn't have the cachet that Kubrick did when Kubrick went to do The Shining. Kubrick could have walked on the set and goes, well, we know Kubrick walked on the set and did whatever the fuck he wanted. Flanagan is a bit more professional in that sense, and a bit, he's not at that level yet. So he's obviously not going to piss off King.
I do love Mike Flanagan. I have to say, like if I could work with any sort of director, it would probably be Mike Flanagan, just based off his. I mean, if I could work on any series, it would be the Haunting series. Even though I know the next.
Even after the second one.
Even I thought the second one was better than the first.
We'll get to that on another podcast.
We could talk about that another day. What he did is brilliant. I mean, it's very much its own film. I mean, it didn't depend on The Shining.
No, that's what makes it really good. It created essentially a Shining world. In there was more to learn about, and like you said, when you saw the film, you wanted to know more about Rose the Hat and
I did want to know. I did want to know more about Rose the Hat, but the film didn't deliver that for me.
Well, no, because
that's what I'm saying.
Because it wasn't a Rose the Hat film.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, I mean, maybe that's what I'd have personally preferred, because she's a way more interesting character than what Danny Torrance ended up being. So maybe a film based on Rose the Hat and her journey. And,
that's funny you said that, David.
Oh, go on.
Well, my next point was, overall on it, I think we're going to agree to disagree. I mean, yeah, we both agree The Shining is a classic.
I agree that Doctor Sleep was a really good film, and if you haven't seen it, and I'm sorry that we might have spoiled it, then you should 100%.
But we did give you warning this was a spoiler bit. So.
Yeah. If you want to compare it to The Shining, I mean, The Shining, to steal from my man Shrek, The Shining's like an onion, all right? It has layers.
Oh, Jesus.
You got one layer, and then you've got a whole other in-depth layers about. I mean, there's a whole documentary based on The Shining, Room 237.
Yeah, because these guys had about 20 years to obsess about every shot and why is the carpet that colour? Why is the wallpaper like this?
But that's what you can do with that film, because
but this is a new
about
film.
It is so.
This
amazing.
film only came out less than 2 years ago.
But with Doctor Sleep, no one's going to look at it that way. No one's going to look at Doctor Sleep and be like, I wonder why that mirror is in that position, or I wonder why he's looking at this direction, or I wonder why he used a German typewriter, or I wonder why that glass was from this manufacturer, or something. Exactly. You can compare it to Nazi Germany, or you can compare it to the slaughter of Native Americans. With Doctor Sleep, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have those layers in it. It's just a film. That's it. It's just a film. Whereas The Shining was art.
Isn't all film art, in the way?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is it's going to be comparing like Michelangelo to your local artist,
I know you want to speak in depth a little bit about Death Cat.
Yeah, Death Cat. I mean, man, can you imagine that cat coming to find you? If you was like in that room and that cat came into your, that cat would get booted out the window. If that was a thing,
well,
that cat would get nowhere near me.
Wouldn't you be in a bed unable to move at this point? Because generally, well, the cat did only go into people who were on their last legs.
Just seeing the cat probably would give me enough to have a heart attack and die through fear of it. But anyway, that cat, I didn't know this, but I looked into it. The cat's an actual cat. So it's like.
So you're telling me that wasn't CGI? It was a real cat.
King added it into the book, and obviously Flanagan added it as well. So there's actually a nursing cat from Rhode Island that can predict the imminent death of the patients in the nursing home. I mean, apparently it can do this by smelling the smell that dead skin cells gives off. Apparently it's a certain odour, and by patients' lack of movement, all help the cat determine that it's going to die. The cat's called Oscar. Give it a Google if you want, but yeah, it's an actual cat, and that is petrifying that this cat actually exists that can predict when someone's going to die. So there were other things that I did really enjoy about Doctor Sleep, such as I thought the actress that was playing Wendy Torrance, Alex Esso, I believe her name is. I felt like she looked so much like Shelley Duvall's Wendy that it was almost uncanny. And it was the small detail of how her hair brushed over her ear, which was instantly recognisable to me. But again, that's because The Shining is so iconic, Neil. That a character's,
Not debating that fact.
A small detail like that is something that I was like, oh my god, this is the character. Like, I was like, oh my god, did they get Shelley? Did they use de-aging technology on Shelley Duvall here? What's going on? I do feel like using the Shining references slowly throughout the film to build on the story did really help on it, but it didn't rely on them. That was good. So it didn't necessarily.
As you were watching it, did you think, okay, it's clearly going to have to end up at the hotel again?
No, I'll give
but
it
then
that.
when it
I
happens,
didn't feel like it did.
But when it happens, you're just like, that's perfect. Of course, where else could the film end?
100%. But in saying that, The Shining stolen the film. You're immediately like put into this nostalgia of going around The Shining and seeing, you're like, oh my god, that's the carpet, and oh my god, that chair was there, and stuff like this. Whereas
You do see it in some early scenes in the flashbacks, but there's one other thing I quickly want to throw in there. Actually, there is a director's cut of Doctor Sleep that adds in an extra half an hour of footage.
Yeah, I haven't seen this. I've only seen the theatrical release.
In Doctor Sleep, as you mentioned about the hotel, we only see the hotel in flashbacks with young Danny until we get there at the end of the film. But what the director's cut does, it adds in chapters to the film, like book chapters. They're all names. And you get along to, I think it's chapter 3 or 4, and it shows you a panning shot of the Overlook in the modern day with a glass of whiskey on the bar waiting for Danny, obviously from Jack.
That scene, by the way, was amazing. That was one of the best scenes in the film with Jack and Danny talking and him trying to get him to become an alcoholic again. Yeah.
From reading interviews with Flanagan and King and that, and what they wanted to do was, for the climax of the film, back at the Overlook, they wanted to make Danny and Abra relive the events of The Shining, with Abra as Danny from the original, and Danny reliving Jack's role.
Wouldn't that have added The Shining's length of time onto the film?
No, but just when they're being chased around at the end,
Oh, okay.
They wanted to him to turn into his old man, and there was always that whole Lincoln.
Right,
feel.
okay, I get you.
That's what they were going for. I mean, I love it when he gets to the hotel and he's like, "I've got to wake it up," and you got all the ghosts in it. And like you said, the final showdown with Rose the Hat there, when he just lets all the ghosts out of the boxes, man, and they just go for it. I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good film. It was a great film. Solid 8 out of 10. But it's not the 10 out of 10, Neil. The Shining's so good, Neil, steals the show in another film. It's the best scene in other films.
Are we talking about Ready Player One?
I wasn't even talking about Ready Player One, but that's another film where it's the best scene in the film. I was talking about Twister.
When the drive-through screen gets blown away, yes.
Yeah.
You earn 1 geek point for that, David. That goes on the board. Twister and The Shining. Brilliant reference. You got anything else to add there before we move on to the last bit of the Doctor Sleep discussion?
You mentioned earlier that you felt the fact that we weren't in the Overlook Hotel and we were exploring it throughout America as a good thing for Doctor Sleep, which it is, because I don't want to be trapped in another film at the Overlook Hotel for the entire film, because I feel like that would be dependent so much on The Shining,
It'd just be a retread.
Which Doctor Sleep was trying to tread its own path. It was trying to create its own film. You didn't even necessarily have to have seen The Shining to enjoy Doctor Sleep, which is something that is very good about it. However, if we're comparing it to The Shining again, the Overlook Hotel was a character in on itself. It had so much personality, it had so much depth to it, whereas how Flanagan presented America was just, it's America. It's just normal. In fact, you couldn't even determine the difference between state lines in some instances.
But I think that's because Flanagan put the focus on the characters and developing the backstory of the film and the key plot devices that King wanted, and didn't focus on one location. I mean, it's a completely different choice from what Kubrick did, but it serves the story of Doctor Sleep better than it does the story of The Shining.
I do agree that it did serve, and I think it is quite contradictory of me to say that, because Kubrick did both, right? Kubrick did character and setting and theme. Everything about The Overlook was a character. Obviously, the characters themselves were incredible, specifically Jack. But what Mike Flanagan did, he did look at character more in depth. But we've already mentioned that we wanted to see more from Rose the Hat. So we've already not looked at certain character depths in the way that we should have. To summarise, Doctor Sleep's amazing, brilliant film, but The Shining is The Shining.
I think it all comes down to personal opinion. I think Doctor Sleep works better because no one was crying out for a sequel to The Shining, right? It's like, it's brilliant, leave it, it's done.
Yeah.
But then
yeah,
King
no,
wanted to.
yeah.
But King had more ideas he wanted to explore. The ideas he brought into Doctor Sleep, like the Cult of the Knot and expanding the mythology of The Shining, that's great, and I want to see more of that. As I watched Doctor Sleep, I just thought the film was so good, and the world building that King had done in the sequel, expanding the Cult of the Knot, expanding what The Shining is, and bringing in all these new characters and backstory, I thought that I'd love to see more of that. And as we both said, we wanted to know more about Rosa Hat, we wanted to know more about the Cult of the Knot. And that, I think for you, David, that tying it back to The Shining was a detriment, whereas you would have preferred probably just to see a separate film about those elements.
No, I don't think tying
If
it
you
back
had
to
seen
the
a
Star
film,
Shining
if
was a
you'd seen a
detriment.
film, right, about a travelling band of psychic energy vampires tracking down kids to take their life force, and it had nothing to do with The Shining, and they didn't call it The Shining, and they called it The Shimmer or something,
Yeah, I wouldn't have enjoyed it.
so you wouldn't have enjoyed it as much.
Yeah, I wouldn't have enjoyed it as much because The Shining has this nostalgic element to it, and whenever it appears, and if you're going to have a sequel of it, of course, you'd want to see it and you'd want to have tie-ins to it. And I have mentioned already that I feel like Doctor Sleep didn't rely on The Shining. Like, you didn't have to have seen it to enjoy Doctor Sleep. But if you'd have just done a film on energy-sucking vampires, then, yeah, I wouldn't be interested in that. Why would I be?
Having said that, now we know others had tried to capitalise on the fandom of The Shining, and at one point Warner Brothers were developing an overlooked movie with director Mark Romanek from 1 Hour Photo, a brilliant, very underseen Robin Williams film. He'd been hired to write and direct, but the film never got off the ground due to budget issues. I was thinking, what would you want from a Doctor Sleep show, or a continuation of that storyline? Now, the show's definitely called Overlook, so I think it looks like they're definitely going to be going back to the Overlook Hotel. Of course, it got burned to the ground at the end of Doctor Sleep. Spoilers. But as we well know, the Overlook is crammed full of ghosts. So, for me, the show could easily be a prequel telling the story of how the Overlook was constructed and fill in the blanks of how it became so haunted. Each episode you could get a backstory on a certain ghost or relative of characters from the original, though there is an inherent danger in giving backstory to all the ghosts. I mean, who are the twins? What is the real story behind Lorraine Massey, the old naked corpse lady? And what's the significance of Room 237? The show could progress in almost a linear time frame, eventually ending with the arrival of the Torrance family in the original.
Yeah, I mean, that would be pretty awesome to see. I mean, I'd love to see Grady correcting the twins, and when his wife gets involved, he can always correct her too. I mean, that would be pretty cool to see.
I mean, I think they are going for the idea of the place being haunted, not the people, right? So another idea I had was, what about if we had the Overlook through different time periods? We know time can flow quite differently in the Overlook, and just like Mike Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, you could have episodes taking place before, during, and after the events of The Shining. I mean, that idea does share some general DNA with, like you say, American Horror Stories Hotel season, where we learn about the ghosts of the Cortez. But, I mean, if the showrunners wanted a more complicated structure, each episode could move on at various important landmarks in the history of the hotel. Another idea could be setting the show after Doctor Sleep. As we all know, the Overlook burnt down at the end of Doctor Sleep, and with some solid backstory, the showrunners could tell a new story about a new hotel being constructed on the site of the old Overlook, and in some ways a reboot of the original story, but set in modern times, where a new family or new guests come to stay at the Overlook, and they get haunted by the previous ghosts, which would really tie into the aspect of the place being haunted that it seems the showrunners want to run, as opposed to the people being haunted.
Yeah, like I said before, if they want to do that, and they think of, like, refurbishing the hotel...
You really like those carpets, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, the carpets are the best thing. The carpets are everywhere. The carpets are referenced in other movies. That's how iconic they are.
This is not a carpet podcast.
If they decide to go down that route, then I think the writing is got to be perfect.
Yeah, I think a lot of success on this potential idea depends on who the showrunners are and who your main creative driving force of the show is. My final idea, and this is the one I like the most and which I'm really proudest of, is I want to know more about the Cult of the Knot, right? As we said, Rosa Hat was easily one of the best new characters introduced in Doctor Sleep. And despite her demise, I'd love to have known more about her group's history and how and where they came from. Now, this could be explained as a side storyline if the show jumped between time periods. Admittedly, the issue I've already written myself into is that Rose only discovers the Outlook at the climax of Doctor Sleep, and she didn't know a thing about all the ghosts in it because they basically fucked her up at the end of it. Having said that, for a show based upon the mythology of the hotel, the timelines also don't line up. But what could work is, again, introduce an earlier set of the Cult of the Knot characters who were aware of the power of the Overlook, or if we went with episodes taking place after Doctor Sleep, here's my favourite one, right? What could work is to introduce a different set of earlier Cult of the Knot characters who were aware of the power of the Overlook. Or, if we went with episodes taking place after Doctor Sleep, we could have the absolutely terrifying ghost of Rose the Hat come back. I mean, she was scary enough as just a psychic energy vampire. If you bring her back as a ghost that's been ripped to pieces by the ghosts in the Overlook, she'd be bloody terrifying. And of course, you could then have her haunting the Overlook and the new guests and the ghosts there. And of course, who would these people turn to help them out? Who would you turn to? You would turn to a now adult Abra Stone who could once again clash with an even more sinister and malevolent Rosa Hat. There's my pitch. Boom. You build up to Rosa Hat being revealed at the end of season 1.
Well, Neil, yeah, that definitely sounds like a good show. I watch it. I mean, anything that's based in the Overlook Hotel is going to be good in my books, and what you've pitched out there at the end does sound like a decent one. And I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for everyone that's listened.
As David said, I hope you enjoyed the podcast today. This was the first episode of the We Needed Roads podcast. And if you want more information on what we're going to be doing, please follow us on Twitter at We Needed Roads Podcast. See you next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
We Needed Roads.